Donald threw me into a mental hospital for 3 years. When he came to pick me up, he still just lashed out at me furiously. You should really be grateful for Catherine's magnanimity. How dare you steal the keepsake her mother left her? Even throwing your filthy life to feed the dogs wouldn't be enough to appease my anger. The wedding has been postponed for 3 years, and you've been gone for 3 years. Go back and explain to Grandma yourself. He emphasized the word, gone, particularly strongly, as if using both threats and inducements, certain that I would surely oppose him. But I just smiled and said, okay, I'll explain. Donald was stunned. If you find it hard to explain, I can help you. Let's go home. For the first time in my life, I refused him. Donald didn't know that the keepsake was originally mine. He also wouldn't know that the man who once asked me to take care of Donald and made me wait for 6 years was finally coming back. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. When the nanny of the Hamilton family followed the medical staff of the mental hospital to find Maggie, she couldn't control herself and stood rooted to the spot. The room in front of her was narrow and dark. Maggie, with messy hair and a dirty face, was lying on a bedboard padded with cardboard that looked like a garbage dump. If she hadn't watched Maggie grow up in the Hamilton family, she would never have believed that this was the former fiancé-to-be of the Hamilton family who had once caused a sensation in City S. At that time, from the top social circles to the roadside beggars, everyone lamented how lucky Maggie was. Now, it seemed that she was no different from the female vagrants in the urban villages. It took her a while to come back to her senses, and she sent a message to Donald's driver. Tell Mr. Donald that the young lady has been found. Soon, Donald came with Catherine. However, both of them stood at the door of the room for a long time, as if they couldn't bring themselves to step in. Maggie was woken up by the Hamilton family's nanny and taken to change clothes. When she came back, she met Donald, who was blocking the door and taking off his coat to put it on Catherine. Their eyes met. For a moment, it was Maggie who lowered her head first and avoided Donald's gaze. Donald was startled by Maggie's evasion. Then, when he saw her emaciated body that was as thin as a skeleton, anger flared up in his heart. Is there no one here to feed you? Or is it that when you had an episode, no one cleaned your room for you? You've made yourself look like this, neither human nor ghost. Is this the way you make Grandma feel sorry for you? This shout attracted many patients from the adjacent rooms to come and watch. Donald didn't know that in this hospital, the normal people were the odd ones out, because the place Donald sent Maggie to wasn't a real mental hospital at all, but just a yard in the mountains where people could be locked up as long as money was paid. Here, there were many people as normal as Maggie, either the elderly abandoned by their families or young people abandoned by their parents and relatives because they had made mistakes. The majority of people here were mentally ill, so the remaining people would also pretend to be abnormal. Those who claimed to be normal here, where food, clothing, shelter, and transportation all depended on others' moods, would be discriminated against and treated differently. If you were normal, would you have been sent here? As expected, a madman is a madman. You should eat less this meal to sober up. Maggie had heard such words countless times when she was first locked up here. Later, she gradually learned to be obedient, to act according to others' expressions, and to make herself dirty and disheveled. What human rights could those who had been abandoned by society have? Maggie didn't want to explain in the face of Donald's angry questioning. She knew Donald all too well. He only wanted to hear what he wanted to hear and would always deny any answer from Maggie. In his eyes, everything she said was just an excuse for herself. So what was the point of saying anything? Maggie lowered her head even deeper. The doctor who led them in broke the frozen atmosphere. Our hospital is on the mountain. It gets even colder on the mountain in winter, and the hospital quilts may not be warm enough. As if standing up for Maggie, he paused and said more. Those without family members sending quilts and clothes usually pick up some cardboard to cover the windows and put it on top of the hospital quilts for warmth when they sleep. And Donald had never come to see Maggie in the past 3 years, nor had he even sent any clothes or bedding. Catherine stared at the doctor for some reason, then looked around the room and suddenly laughed. It seems that you two have a very good relationship in private. The doctor touched his head, as if he didn't understand. What do you mean? Catherine hid behind Donald, like a frightened rabbit. You're helping Maggie so much. I thought you too. I'm sorry. I was just overthinking. Sister Maggie has always been very popular. The environment here is really not good. There's even co-ed accommodation. I only thought too much when I saw that Sister Maggie had a red mark on her neck. Hearing this, Donald pulled Catherine closer to him and looked around. Indeed, there were both men and women behind each door. Then he saw the red mark on Maggie's neck. This was simply absurd. Catherine almost shrank into Donald's arms. The environment is so dirty. Will sister get sick? Donald. Although she was talking about the dirty environment, she was actually also referring to Maggie. Maggie glanced indifferently at Catherine, who was deliberately causing trouble, and accidentally noticed that Donald was looking at her with a dark face. He took a few steps closer to Maggie and forced out a few words. After 3 years, you still have your tricks. With this reminder, everyone in the room couldn't help but think of the day 3 years ago. Donald became even angrier. He grabbed Maggie's chin and lifted it up. Donald looked down at Maggie from above. You should really be grateful for Catherine's magnanimity. Stealing the keepsake her mother left her. Even throwing your filthy life to feed the dogs wouldn't be enough to appease my anger. He carefully examined the red mark on Maggie's neck. After finding that it was just a scratch, he secretly let out a sigh of relief. But he didn't completely relax. He issued another warning to Maggie. If you mess around, it means you're degrading yourself. I will never touch you again. With a flick of his wrist, Maggie was like being slapped in the face and turned her head to the side. The wedding has been postponed for 3 years, and you've been gone for 3 years. Go back and explain to Grandma yourself. He emphasized the word, gone, particularly strongly, as if using both threats and inducements. Certain that Maggie would surely oppose him, Donald took out a wet wipe and slowly wiped the hand that had just touched Maggie. There was still a group of people from the Hamilton family waiting outside. He thought that as long as Maggie objected, he could use more means to suppress her and make her shut up. Over the past decade or so, Donald's eldest brother picked Maggie up and brought her home. But Maggie almost caused his eldest brother to die in a fire because of stealing things. The Hamilton family, out of pity, arranged for Maggie's marriage with Donald. But she disrupted the wedding, just to steal a jade pendant, and almost caused Catherine to commit suicide. The former Maggie had a bad character, a ruthless heart, and despicable means, which everyone had witnessed. But the next second, to everyone's surprise, Maggie just lowered her head even deeper. Okay, I'll explain. Donald had never seen such a Maggie. Distant, indifferent, and even obedient. And this was exactly the kind of Maggie he had once wanted. Now, he felt even angrier, or perhaps a little flustered. He had just wanted to teach Maggie to be a girl with clean hands and a pure heart. He was stunned for a moment and tried to take a step back. If you find it hard to explain, I can help you. Let's go home. Maggie interrupted him. This was also the first time in more than a decade that she had refused him. Donald didn't know that the keepsake was originally Maggie's. He also wouldn't know that the person who had once asked Maggie to take care of him and made Maggie wait for 6 years was finally coming back. The car didn't drive directly to the Hamilton family's residence but went to the best hospital in City S. Donald couldn't let Maggie, who looked like this, meet Grandma directly. It would not only be embarrassing but also difficult to explain. Moreover, what if Maggie had really contracted some disease in the past 3 years? As he thought about this, his eyes fell on Maggie's face. It had been a long time since he had carefully observed this face. At this moment, he felt that the Maggie in front of him was extremely unfamiliar. He couldn't even find the slightest trace of the Maggie who had always chased after him and said she would protect him 3 years ago. After looking at her for a while, Maggie seemed to sense such a burning gaze and looked up at Donald. Donald was almost rooted to the spot by that gaze. It was cold, even filled with hatred. But at this moment, Maggie's face was pale, her eyes were lifeless, and her lips had no trace of blood. Donald was stared at, but he didn't feel like getting angry. Instead, he just felt as if a hand was covering his heart, and it was melting. He opened his mouth feebly. Why didn't you tell me earlier if you've been having a hard time? After saying this, Maggie smiled. Was it really appropriate for someone who hadn't sent a single greeting to her in 3 years to ask her such a question? Maggie looked at Donald with a mocking smile and turned her head to look out the window. Donald realized this later. When he wanted to say something more, his sleeve was held, and a tear fell on his hand. Catherine's eyes were sad. It will be my mother's death anniversary soon. Donald, I'm sorry. I just feel guilty seeing Sister Maggie like this. But when I see Sister Maggie, I think of my mother. I'm sorry. Maggie turned around and looked at Catherine, who was crying in Donald's arms. Catherine's tears fell in big drops. I really don't know why Sister Maggie treated me like this. I can still dream of my mother asking me why I broke the jade pendant. Donald, I don't want to live. Donald panicked for a moment and directly hugged her into his arms. It's okay, Catherine. It's not your fault. It's all Maggie's fault. I'll find a way to make Maggie compensate you. Maggie was taken aback when she heard this. Even if Donald didn't know the truth of what happened 3 years ago, wasn't being locked up in a mental hospital for 3 years enough? At the engagement banquet 3 years ago, it was clearly the safety amulet she was wearing that was snatched away by Catherine. At that time, Catherine looked at Maggie with a face full of disbelief, took out an identical safety amulet, and kept muttering that it was impossible. Maggie didn't understand. At that time, she only knew that Catherine had chased after Donald before and had played some petty tricks on her. That was all. But the next second, Catherine smashed the safety amulet in her hand in front of her. Not only that, but she also slapped herself several times, and her fair face immediately turned red and swollen. Catherine broke down and cried, and the matter was completely blown out of proportion. When Donald came, he slapped Maggie without asking any questions. Stealing things. Hitting people. I've taught you since you were a child, but you still don't learn. Why on earth are you like this? Maggie. The Hamilton family had been so good to Maggie. Why on earth? These words had been haunting Maggie like a nightmare for 3 years. But clearly, Maggie hadn't done any of those things. Maggie had heard from her adoptive parents that the amulet was something she had been wearing when they found her. It was probably left by her biological parents. But Catherine not only took out an identical one but also did some strange things. Maggie thought deeply and was slightly stunned. Donald beside her seemed to suddenly think of something and turned to meet Maggie's gaze. Donald thought he knew Maggie very well. If it were 3 years ago, Maggie would surely rush up and make a scene to separate the two people hugging each other. Thinking of this, Donald held the person in his arms even tighter, afraid that Maggie would suddenly go crazy. Maggie, don't go crazy. Don't you want to go back to the Hamilton family? His threat stopped abruptly. Donald saw that Maggie had obediently leaned back against the window again. Maggie looked at the scenery outside the window, lost in thought. Donald would never believe Maggie's explanation but would firmly believe everything Catherine said. Donald had once protected her behind him like this, but in her life, it seemed that she was always being abandoned. She had been abandoned by her biological parents since birth. Her adoptive parents later abandoned her on the street and ran away when she was 8 years old. In order to survive, she had been a vagrant for a month, begging along the street and even stealing. Like stealing bread from breakfast shops. When she was the hungriest, she would rummage through the leftovers in the restaurant's trash cans. It was that time when she sneaked into the back kitchen and was caught. The boss grabbed her by the collar and threw her out of the restaurant. Maggie fell heavily to the ground in front of the restaurant. Her internal organs ached terribly, and she couldn't get up for a long time. People around watched, and the boss cursed at her. You little slut with no mother to raise you. You come to the store to steal things every day. Everyone, come and take a look. It wasn't until the crowd dispersed that Maggie got up from the ground and sat under a big tree beside her. The car door of a car that stopped in front of her opened, and a boy about the same height as Maggie got out. Are you a little thief? After saying this, the boy's head was tapped. There was an elderly grandmother sitting in the car with a kind face. Little one, would you like to come home with me? Grandma can provide for your studies and meals. You just need to help Grandma do some housework at home. Later, Maggie entered the Hamilton family like this, because she did things steadily. Grandmother often praised her in front of the Hamilton family brothers. The boy who got out of the car and called her a little thief was Donald. The other boy who didn't show his face in the car, that is, the boy who actually proposed to bring Maggie home, was Joseph, the eldest son of the Hamilton family. Maggie also didn't expect that later, one of the Hamilton family brothers would become her fiancé, and the other would become the white moonlight she hadn't seen for many years. 6 years and then another 3 years. Joseph was coming back soon. In the hospital, Maggie finished the examination. After the doctor told Donald about Maggie's usual precautions, he led the people to queue up at the window to get the medicine. Maggie was sitting alone on a hospital bench when she suddenly heard someone call her name. Maggie, is it really you? The woman who spoke had long curly wavy hair and a slightly protruding belly. Seeing that Maggie looked at her for a while as if she didn't recognize her, she began to introduce herself. You might have forgotten me. You and Donald even attended my wedding. Donald and I are friends. Maggie thought she did look familiar but didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The woman also saw Donald, who was getting the medicine, and assumed that the two of them were together. Anyway, I haven't seen you for 3 years. I thought you two had broken up. Now it seems I was overthinking. Donald really likes you. Maggie was directly stunned by this out-of-the-blue statement of liking. The woman continued to praise their relationship on her own. Such a famous young master is willing to lower himself and queue up to get the medicine for you in person. Where can you find such a good man? Since Donald announced his engagement to you, there hasn't been a single piece of gossip about him. How many men can do that nowadays? You're so lucky. Maggie forced a smile. She never expected that one day the word happiness would be associated with her. If liking meant locking someone up in a mental hospital, she hoped that no one would like her. No normal person's liking would be like this. And she had never thought about these things before. It's just that outsiders didn't know that their marriage was just arranged by the elders. Donald had already gotten the medicine and came over, and he casually hugged Maggie into his arms. He was first startled by the feeling of Maggie's body, which was nothing but bones. But he quickly regained his normal expression. Of course, we're already engaged. Do you think I'd dump you? Maggie listened awkwardly to their conversation, feeling like an object hanging on Donald's waist for others to admire. At this moment, she was extremely certain that Donald would like anyone but her. The two of them were just acting. Over the past 3 years, she thought she had developed an iron heart. But at this moment, her heart was still aching densely, because she couldn't lie to herself that Donald had really been good to her in the past. Previously, when Maggie had a minor cold, Donald would be so anxious that he would run around and personally blow the medicine and feed it to Maggie. When Maggie had a fever and nightmares, he would hold her in his arms and soothe her. He would pay attention to her body temperature all night long and change the cold towel on Maggie's forehead. He would be the first to stand up and protect Maggie when someone spoke ill of her and wouldn't allow anyone to bully her. Donald was so good that occasionally she would think they had been in love. But she also clearly understood one thing. She didn't want to be trapped in the Hamilton family as Donald's ornament in the future. She had to escape. And she must escape. The wedding will definitely be held. Donald glanced at the person in his arms who was in a daze with a doting look. It won't be long. Remember to come then. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sound of someone falling behind them. Everyone turned around. It was Catherine, who had just gone to the bathroom and come back. She softly called out, "Donald." And Donald immediately pushed away Maggie, whom he was holding, ran over to pick up Catherine, and started shouting for a doctor everywhere. He didn't care about Maggie at all and even pushed her so hard that she hit the bench behind her. Maggie let out a muffled groan of pain. The woman who had been chatting with Donald with a smile also seemed to sense something and left with an embarrassed smile. Once again, Maggie was left alone. She looked at the medicine that Donald had dropped all over the ground while picking up Catherine. Under the disdainful glances of the passers-by, she picked up the medicine one by one, held them in her arms, and walked towards the parking area outside the hospital. She sat alone in the car. After a few hours, 2 familiar figures finally appeared in the direction of the hospital entrance. Next to Catherine was an old man, her father. The car door was opened from Maggie's side. Before she could react, the old man was about to slap her in the face. She almost immediately closed her eyes and didn't react in time to dodge. After a moment of silence, Maggie opened her eyes, and Donald's hand had grabbed the hand that was about to land the slap. "What are you doing?" Donald said this almost instinctively. Maggie didn't have any serious dirty diseases, just a bunch of troublesome minor problems. He had just been scolded by the doctor. Her severe stomach problem had been dragged on for so long, and the doctor said that there was a possibility of cancer if it was any later. Moreover, when she was in the mental hospital, he hadn't been willing to hit her himself. Catherine was also startled by Donald's sudden reaction and said in a weak voice, "Donald." Donald didn't realize that he had overreacted either and let go of that wrist. He looked at Maggie, stunned. Maggie used to be so bold and ostentatious. She would definitely not swallow her anger and take this slap. But just now, he had seen Maggie close her eyes, seeing that the situation was not right. Catherine immediately apologized to Maggie in a humble voice. "Sister Maggie, it was my fault just now. I shouldn't have fallen. Donald carried me purely out of kindness. Please don't blame him." Maggie thought her nonsense was ridiculous. Before she could resist this slander, she was interrupted by the old man. Catherine's father let out a cold snort. still with an unfriendly expression, and spoke even more sarcastically. You really have some tricks. My daughter has been troubled time and time again by this wild girl who was picked up. Why is Catherine ill as soon as this woman comes back? If I had known this, I wouldn't have handed my daughter over to you. Donald. Donald felt caught in a dilemma. He did owe the Catherine family. And besides, the cause of this matter was the mess Maggie had made 3 years ago. The father and daughter of the Pay family sang in unison. Catherine immediately, with an understanding look, hooked a small section of Donald's finger, and her words were full of pitifulness. It's all in the past. Donald, since that's the case, can you ask Sister Maggie to apologize? After a while, when Donald looked at Maggie again, his eyes had become sharp. About what happened 3 years ago. You have to apologize today. Maggie, that was your doing. I won't clean up your mess for you. Hurry up and apologize to Catherine. Maggie didn't show much emotion and apologized as they wished. Sorry. She was afraid that she would anger Donald again because of Catherine's matter and he would lock her up again in a fit of anger. Catherine and her mother looked at each other, as if they hadn't expected this. Only Donald clenched his fists secretly. The former Maggie would never be like this. Now he would rather believe that the Maggie in front of him had been replaced by someone from the hospital. He felt depressed again. Such an obedient Maggie was exactly what he wanted, wasn't she? Donald didn't dare to think deeply. He pushed Maggie to the inner side of the seat, stepped into the car with his long legs, sat down, closed the door, and opened the window in one smooth motion. If Catherine isn't feeling well, I'll trouble you. Uncle, I have to take Maggie away. Catherine frowned. Before she could say anything, she could only see the exhaust fumes of the car pass in front of her. She finally no longer concealed her fierce expression and cursed in place. Catherine's father didn't say anything for a while. He called the driver of the Catherine family, and the father and daughter got into the car one after another. Catherine's father sat in the passenger seat and smoked for a while, then said silently, "It really looks very similar." Catherine glanced at her father through the vanity mirror and said in an unfriendly tone, "Dad, what are you talking nonsense about? How could my sister be such a promiscuous wild girl?" The safety amulet incident 3 years ago had indeed planted a seed in Catherine's father's heart. Just now, in a fit of anger, he had wanted to hit Maggie. In fact, in the end, when he saw that face, he had also held back some of his strength. It was too similar, especially the current Maggie, who was as thin as a skeleton, and the way Catherine's mother looked a few days before her death when she couldn't eat. After Catherine said this, she was actually a bit scared in her heart. But she still thought this way. Her sister would never be such a country girl. The two of them were silent all the way. When they finally got out of the car, Catherine thought her father was being strange and rushed back home ahead of him. Catherine's father wanted to smoke again, but the cigarette pack was already empty. He sighed and instructed the driver, "Arrange for someone to sneak into the Hamilton family and find a way to get Maggie's DNA." He closed his eyes. What he couldn't forget was the eldest daughter that Catherine's mother had been muttering about before she passed away. He used to be young and full of vigor. When his family's business was on the rise, he found a fortune teller. The fortune teller predicted that Catherine's mother would give birth to 2 daughters before she was about to give birth. And it turned out to be true. So he firmly believed in this fortune teller. Later, when the company was in a downturn, the fortune teller made another prediction. He said that the eldest daughter was born to be a jinx to her father and had to be sent away. No matter how much Catherine's mother cried, he still sent the eldest daughter away. However, he gave her a safety amulet identical to Catherine's. When Donald got out of the car, he saw Maggie limping. He didn't ask her directly but secretly sent someone to investigate what Maggie had been through in the mental hospital for the past 3 years. At dinner, Maggie changed into an old set of clothes. It was obvious that they were her old clothes, but they hung loosely on her. The nanny called her to sit at the dining table to eat. Maggie looked at the sumptuous dishes on the table but didn't pick up her chopsticks. Donald got up from the sofa and noticed a trace of embarrassment on Maggie's face. As he walked towards the dining table, he sized up the current Maggie and found a patch of dark purple bruise on her calf. He was originally going to get angry, but before he opened his mouth, he realized that it was he who had pushed her in the hospital. He sat down opposite Maggie and put some meat into Maggie's bowl. "Eat more, or Grandma will say that I'm treating you badly." He didn't know why, but all the kind words of concern that came out of his mouth always seemed to be distorted. But he didn't think he was wrong. Maggie was a scheming person after all. Maggie was stunned for a moment but still didn't move her chopsticks. She remembered that just now in the room, after fiddling with her phone for the first time in 3 years, she had received a large number of photos and messages from Catherine. In countless photos, it showed her and Donald traveling around the world, eating and having fun together in the past 3 years. Maggie realized that those were the places that Donald had promised to travel with her before. But the most eye-catching were the few photos of them holding hands that were sent later. However, after a while, she retracted them. Sister Maggie, don't worry. I've kept a close eye on Donald in the past 3 years. He's been with me every day. Don't worry. There's no other woman in his eyes. You two will definitely be together happily. When Maggie looked up again, she saw the nanny bring a bottle of some medicine to Donald. She didn't think much of it. Now that there were no outsiders around, some words could finally be spoken openly. Donald, you brought me back. You actually don't want to marry me, do you? What do you mean? Donald's eyes darkened, and the medicine he was holding to wipe Maggie's bruise stopped in midair. But Maggie was extremely calm. She took a deep breath and said, "Our wedding was just an arrangement by Grandma. I have no feelings for you, and you don't want to marry me either. Why don't you cancel the engagement by using the excuse of my disappearance?" The entire hall was so quiet that only their breaths could be heard. Donald's eyes became sour, and his anger suddenly surged. Maggie, the Hamilton family has treated you well. Maggie wasn't willing to back down either. She didn't understand why Donald always confused the two things. The Hamilton family is the Hamilton family, and you are you. The daughter-in-law of the Hamilton family doesn't have to be me. Could it be that you can't do without me? Catherine is still waiting for you, don't you? With a crash, the glass medicine bottle was smashed to the ground by Donald. The glass shattered and flew everywhere. What does Catherine have to do with me? Are you trying to ruin yourself? Maggie. Donald didn't know what was wrong with Maggie. Since she came back from the mental hospital, she had been constantly drawing a line between them. Now, she actually dared to suggest breaking off the engagement. Maggie was just playing tricks, trying to make him give in. Donald thought stubbornly. Maggie, I'm telling you, no matter what tricks you're playing, it's impossible, and you don't have the right to do that. Donald made a final decision and turned around to leave, not giving Maggie a chance to speak. Maggie was left there feeling depressed. It was clearly a proposal that was beneficial to both parties. What on earth was Donald's problem? After a while, the nanny cleaned up the mess and said an extra word. Miss Maggie, this medicine was originally for you to apply to the bruise on your leg. Upon hearing this, Maggie took a look. The nanny quickly lowered her head, finished cleaning up, and left. She returned to her room. The room was the same as it was 3 years ago. The furniture was in exactly the same position, and there was no dust. It was as if someone had carefully cleaned it every day. In the blink of an eye, Donald didn't come home for a week, and the nanny watched over Maggie's 3 meals every day. Maggie already had some flesh on her face. When Donald came back, he pulled Maggie to Catherine's mother's cemetery with a gloomy face. That day was the anniversary of Catherine's mother's death. When Maggie was still in the car, she received a threatening message from Catherine, flaunting her power. Guess how Donald will deal with you for me later. Maggie quickly took a screenshot. The next second, Catherine indeed retracted the message. The weather was gloomy. Donald and Maggie walked for a while before reaching the destination. There was a group of policemen surrounding the area not far away. Catherine was standing in a slightly offside position with a knife against her neck. Donald walked forward a few steps anxiously and said in a soothing tone, trying to negotiate, Catherine, I've brought Maggie here. Can we talk about this properly? Catherine didn't buy it. After Donald's phone rang twice, she choked up and said, I don't know why Sister Maggie treated me and my mother like this. I just wanted to be friends with her, but she treated me like this. I don't want to live anymore. After saying this, almost everyone's gaze turned to Maggie. Donald also took a look and quickly opened his phone to check. There were 2 screenshots of Maggie, insulting Catherine and her mother. Catherine, you stick to Donald like a dog every day. You're so cheap. Your mother must have been killed by you. If I were you, I would have died long ago. You made me locked up for 3 years. Why didn't those slaps at the engagement banquet kill you? Such unbearable and vulgar words filled the 2 screenshots. Donald was trying his best to hold back and took a deep breath. Then he looked at Maggie calmly. Maggie was standing in front of Catherine's mother's grave when she heard Donald say, kneel down and kowtow to apologize. Maggie looked at Donald in disbelief. Are you crazy? Donald, you believe everything she says. Can't these screenshots be photoshopped? Did you get your head kicked by a donkey? Donald repeated it again, his voice leaving no room for argument. Kneel down and kowtow to apologize to Catherine and Auntie. Maggie felt as if her whole head was on fire. In full view of everyone, she took out her phone, unlocked it, and was about to show Donald the screenshot of Catherine's provocation just now. She had just found the screenshot, but before she could raise it to show Donald, Donald slapped the phone out of Maggie's hand, sending it flying several meters away. It hit a stone and shattered into pieces. He didn't understand why Maggie was still trying to argue. How had Maggie become like this? Donald stood there and saw a tear fall from Maggie's eyes. Before Maggie could speak, Donald warned her, "This is about a human life. Maggie, don't push things to the limit." Maggie didn't say anything. It was as if her heart had broken at the same time as the phone shattered. She was like a walking corpse, looking blankly at Donald, who was now blurred in her vision. Donald dragged her body, moved a little closer to Catherine's mother's grave, and pressed Maggie down to kneel. He saw Maggie's hands and thighs trembling continuously, and slowly pressed Maggie to kowtow with a thud. Donald let out a sigh of relief and caught a glimpse of Catherine releasing the knife against her neck. His gaze fell on the photo of Catherine's mother, and he wanted to kowtow again with Maggie, but before he could, the hand that Donald had placed on Maggie's head was suddenly twisted and broken by someone. Then he was kicked away and fell heavily to the ground, spitting out a mouthful of dark blood. Maggie turned around. Before she could see who it was, she was pulled up, wrapped in a blanket, and embraced in a warm embrace. "Sorry, I made you wait too long." Maggie didn't even need to look to know who it was and called out, "Joseph." Then, as if finding a support, she fell asleep. Grandmother, leaning on a crutch, looked at Donald, who was getting up from the ground, and cursed, "You beast." Catherine's father also rushed in right behind and grabbed Catherine among the crowd of policemen. The farce ended there. Joseph picked up Maggie and passed Donald by. When Maggie opened her eyes again, she saw the ceiling of the hospital. Joseph was sitting beside her, holding her hand and falling asleep. She tried to pull her hand out, but Joseph was immediately awakened. He looked at Maggie, who was looking weak, with a worried expression. Maggie was stunned for a moment, feeling as if it were a dream, and instinctively felt wronged. "It wasn't me." Joseph adjusted the quilt for her and affirmed her. "I know." Maggie let out a sigh of relief. Just as she thought the dream was about to end, the door of the ward was kicked open. "Joseph, what do you mean?" Donald had a cast on his hand and came in looking like he was coming to seek an explanation. Joseph ignored him and looked at Maggie for a while. With the sound of the crutch, Donald was beaten to his knees by the arriving grandmother. "I think you should just call off this wedding." Donald was unconvinced, but Maggie, who had a weak voice, spoke first. "Grandma, I'm okay. This wedding should go ahead." Everyone in the room was shocked. Only Joseph got up and left without showing much expression. Donald's heart, which had been in his throat, fell back to the ground. Grandmother didn't try to persuade her further either. She just went up and gently touched Maggie's face, which had become thin again, with pity. "Child, as long as you've thought it through." After being discharged from the hospital, Maggie was extremely efficient in setting the nearest auspicious day for the wedding. She took care of the wedding invitations, the wedding dress, the makeup, the hairstyle, and the photography all by herself. Donald was more than surprised. He knew he was at fault. Catherine and her father disappeared after that day, which was enough to show that there was a problem. On that day, he just didn't want Maggie to have the burden of a human life on her in the future. He knew that any explanation would be in vain, so he would follow Maggie around when she was busy with the wedding, even though Maggie didn't pay much attention to him. When it was the last time to adjust the size of the wedding dress, Donald stood by. Maggie had gained a little more weight, and the wedding dress fit her perfectly. She was filled with emotions. Donald had imagined this scene countless times in his mind. The shop assistant also praised, "This wedding dress seems to be made for the bride. It fits so well. The two of you really have a deep relationship." The groom is always looking at the bride with so much love every time. Donald's heart warmed at these words, and he looked at Maggie's reaction. Maggie just looked at herself in the mirror with a cold face and then gave a faint smile to the shop assistant. Donald felt a bit bitter in his heart. A week before the wedding, the bride and groom were not allowed to see each other, so Donald moved out. That night, a guest came to the huge house. Joseph stood on the balcony of Maggie's room and tapped on the window glass lightly. Not asleep yet. Maggie opened the balcony window and stood outside, standing in the same shadow as Joseph. I'm not going to marry him. Oh. Joseph followed her words. Do you want me to help you run away from the wedding? Maggie looked at him quietly. Joseph continued. Why should you run away from the wedding? It will also have a bad impact on the Hamilton family. Maggie looked at the man in front of her for a while. From his eyes, nose, to his mouth. Because of the fire 9 years ago. You said it. Joseph also looked at himself in the same way Maggie had looked at him and stared back at her. Then he turned around and climbed down the building, leaving a sentence. Wait for my news. Maggie went back to her room, packed up all her belongings, and carried the bags downstairs. In the backyard, Maggie started a fire and threw her things into it one by one. She became more and more sober. Some loves could only survive in memories. The next day, Joseph sent Maggie a piece of flight ticket information. It was for noon on the day of the wedding. If you've made up your mind, get on the second wedding car that comes to pick you up before the wedding leaves. He will take you to the airport. Maggie understood that Joseph was giving her an escape route. She could change her mind at any time, but she didn't. On the day of the wedding, she resolutely got on the second wedding car. The driver was Joseph. They looked at each other through the rearview mirror. Maggie picked up the flight ticket prepared on the seat. They didn't say a word to each other until they reached the airport. There was a bit of a traffic jam on the way. After leaving the wedding car procession behind, Joseph drove at full speed. The time was tight. After getting out of the car, Maggie, wearing a wedding dress, ran all the way. Remember to send a message to let me know you're safe. After Joseph shouted this, he saw Maggie pause for a moment, and then she gradually disappeared from his sight. As Maggie ran, she took off the complicated jewelry on her body, not caring at all about the gazes of countless people at the airport. The wedding dress couldn't pass through the security check, so she borrowed a pair of scissors and cut the wedding dress until there was only a thin skirt left. Maggie successfully boarded the plane, and the plane took off. On the other side, the wedding was in progress. At the wedding scene, the bride didn't arrive for a long time. At first, the entourage said there was a traffic jam, and later they found that the bride wasn't in the motorcade at all. When Donald received the news in the lounge, he insisted that they had gotten separated during the traffic jam, until he called Maggie 20 or 30 times and got no answer. And later her phone was directly turned off. The wedding guests also felt that something was wrong and started talking among themselves. It's been almost an hour. Is this wedding going to continue or not? I don't know. If it's a traffic jam, it can't be this bad. It's not even rush hour. The bride is Maggie from 3 years ago. She was so outgoing before. Maybe she's not getting married again. With the, I see, expressions on everyone's faces, Donald hid in the dark, and his face became uglier and uglier. Finally, someone came to report to him. Miss Maggie got on a car that was heading for the airport. Many people have already taken photos of Miss Maggie running for the plane in a wedding dress at the airport, and it's already becoming popular online. The license plate number of that car is. The person hesitated, avoided Donald's gaze, and didn't say anything further. Donald, who had been covering his face in a daze, suddenly became furious. He grabbed the collar of the person and growled in a low voice. Are you dumb? Speak. Yes. It's your elder brother, Joseph. Donald thought it was ridiculous. His own elder brother had abducted his bride. The relationship between them was so complicated that it couldn't be sorted out in 8 lifetimes. Right. What did the two of them want? To take revenge on him. Joseph was also a member of the Hamilton family. So what did he want? He quickly went through his memories in his mind and realized that his elder brother, who had once loved and cared for him, had already kicked him when he came back, carried away the fainted Maggie, and taken care of the unconscious Maggie. He released the hand that was grabbing the other person's collar and ruffled his carefully styled hair a few times. Where's Joseph? He went to the Hamilton family's old residence. The person replied. It was as if he suddenly remembered something, and he suddenly turned his head to look. His grandmother, who should have been at the wedding scene, hadn't shown up at all that day. He was the only one who had become a joke at this wedding. He just stood there and started laughing. In the end, he punched the wall twice. There was blood on Donald's hand, and his laughter gradually subsided, leaving only a tired and hateful look in his eyes. Go back to the old residence. The journey from the wedding scene to the Hamilton family's old residence usually took an hour. But this time Donald only took nearly 40 minutes. As soon as he got out of the car, He rushed towards Joseph's car and smashed all the windows with a wrench. Donald's eyes were bloodshot. When he saw Joseph coming out of the house, he rushed up and punched him. "Damn you, Joseph. What do you take me for?" As he said this, he was about to punch again. Before he could land the punch, his elbow was grabbed and twisted behind his back, and he was like a subdued criminal. Donald didn't know that Joseph had learned these martial arts moves. His punches and kicks looked ridiculous in front of Joseph. "Damn you." Donald was held up by Joseph behind him and couldn't move at all. After a while, he heard Joseph sigh and say, "Back then, I shouldn't have left Maggie in the Hamilton family and let her take care of you. You bastard. Instead of me. Donald, you're a scumbag." Donald didn't understand what was going on. Then he was kicked to the ground by Joseph. He fell to the ground and took a while to recover. Finally, he caught the important information in those sentences. "Joseph, what do you mean? What do you mean by you left Maggie in the Hamilton family? What do you mean by let her take care of me instead of you?" Joseph didn't speak. He looked down at Donald and laughed. "Guess. What's the relationship between Maggie and me?" Donald finally got up from the ground. Just as he was about to punch Joseph in the face again, grandmother finally came out. "Brothers of the same family, aren't you ashamed enough already?" The anger between the two of them subsided instantly. Grandmother sighed and said, "Come in, all of you." The three of them went in. Only after grandmother sat down in her seat did Donald dare to ask, "Why?" Grandmother was also puzzled. "Don't you have a clue in your own heart?" He really didn't have a clue. Joseph gave him a disdainful look beside him, and he was also rebuked by grandmother. "Joseph, what have you done? Don't you have a clue in your own heart?" Joseph also didn't know what to say. When he remained silent, grandmother continued. "From the day at the cemetery, when Maggie came back after 3 years and agreed to get married in the ward, I guessed that this day would come. Of course I know that Maggie is a good child and has her reasons for everything she does." She looked at Joseph and asked, "Have you had enough of this? It's time to give me an explanation." "Right." Joseph didn't hide anything either. He waved his hand behind him, and someone came in. Donald took a closer look and recognized that it was the nanny who had gone with him to pick up Maggie. For a moment, his heart sank to the bottom. "Grandma, Donald has locked Maggie in a mental hospital for the past 3 years. As soon as Joseph said this, not only was Donald shocked, but grandmother was also speechless. Joseph glanced at Donald and motioned for the nanny to speak. "Yes, that's right. Not long ago, I went with young Master Donald to pick up Miss Maggie. I was also shocked. No one knew where Miss Maggie had been for 3 years. That day, I saw Miss Maggie lying in a small compartment of the mental hospital, all dirty and messy. It was like a prison. Of course, I didn't dare to tell anyone." Joseph didn't give them a chance to catch their breath and continued to drop a bombshell. "According to my investigation, it wasn't a real mental hospital at all. It was a prison where people could be locked up as long as money was paid. It's in the mountains. People couldn't get enough to eat or wear warm clothes, and they had to work like beasts all day long." He almost shouted this out. Since Maggie disappeared until she was picked up, his informants in the Hamilton family had finally found out what had happened in the past 3 years and told him. He had had countless nightmares, seeing Maggie questioning him over and over again, so he rushed back without stopping, and he only managed to save Maggie, who was being forced to kowtow. At the cemetery, Joseph couldn't bear to think about the countless torments Maggie had suffered. 9 years ago, Maggie was the little sun that had illuminated his life. 9 years later, Maggie was a broken light bulb that would shatter at the slightest touch. Joseph didn't say anything more. Grandmother, who had been sitting upright originally, was now half collapsed on the chair. She had some difficulty breathing. "Announce publicly that the wedding between Maggie and Donald is cancelled. It's our Hamilton family that's sorry to Maggie. Tell the people below to keep their mouths shut. No one is allowed to cause trouble for Maggie anymore." Donald knelt down on the spot and was still feebly explaining. "Grandma, no, I truly love Maggie. I just wanted her to learn some manners there. I just wanted to give her a little lesson." "No, Grandma, if we cancel it now, what will others think of Maggie?" Grandmother stood up and slapped him. "You ungrateful wretch. How can what you've done compare to those rumors and gossips? Wasn't it you who did those stupid things 3 years ago? What were you doing before? Do you think there won't be any rumors and gossips if she has to follow someone like you for the rest of her life? Get out of here." She felt a sharp pain in her heart and hated herself for not investigating when Maggie disappeared 3 years ago. She was an experienced person and could see clearly that Maggie was a good girl. She just thought that if Maggie didn't want to get married and hid herself away, then it was up to her. But she never expected that by doing so, she had instead become an accomplice. Grandmother fell backward and fainted from anger. Grandmother was so angry that she took to her bed and couldn't get up. Donald was later carried out of the Hamilton family's house. Donald's mind was in a mess. He went back to the home he shared with Maggie and always felt that all this wasn't real. Maggie must still be at home waiting for him. But when he got home, he didn't think so anymore. The empty house didn't seem to be missing anything at first glance. But when he rushed up to Maggie's room on the second floor, he was stunned. In the past 3 years, he had arranged for many people to carefully take care of Maggie's room. He had entered this room countless times and was familiar with every small ornament in it. At this moment, however, the room was completely empty. Not even a single strand of Maggie's hair was left. He searched every corner like a madman, but he couldn't find even one piece of Maggie's clothing or one of her earrings, except for a few obtrusive, double happiness characters in the hall. It was as if this person had never appeared in his life. It was just like his fantasy. Suddenly, there were footsteps behind him. Donald didn't want to turn around. He sat on the ground and gave a bitter smile. The person still spoke. It was the nanny he had hired to take care of Maggie's 3 meals a day. Mr. Hamilton, do you need me to arrange dinner? There was a noticeable tremor in her tone. She had also seen the related reports online. She had waited at home all day, only to see Donald, who completely ignored her existence, go upstairs and search for things like a madman. At this crucial moment, if she said the wrong thing, she might be fired. Instead of waiting for Donald to go crazy again, she heard Donald say, "Yes, make it delicious. Didn't you say Maggie likes fish? Go buy a fish and make it fragrant. She'll be back soon." She couldn't stop Donald, and there was no reason to. But suddenly remembering something, she said to Donald, "Sir, there's a dark patch in the backyard. Do you want to go and see how to deal with it?" Donald turned to look at her. His eyes lit up, and he ran to the backyard. Those dark things were unrecognizable, always the traces left by something that had been burned. Donald didn't mind getting dirty and reached out to rummage through the pile of ashes. There was a piece of corner of a garment that hadn't been completely burned, and there was also something that could barely be recognized as a ring. Donald recognized the corner of the garment. It was the embroidered shirt that Maggie had custom-made for him at the engagement banquet 3 years ago. The other ring was the wedding ring that Maggie should have put on his finger herself today. It had lost its original pattern and shape, but it could still be worn with some effort. Donald squatted on the ground and forcefully put the ring on his ring finger. He remembered that there was a camera in the backyard. He immediately stumbled back into the house and took out the iPad to check the surveillance. As expected, he saw Maggie in the surveillance. The surveillance was blurry, but he could tell that Maggie had no expression on her face. She dragged a bag of things downstairs to the backyard and then started a fire. She began to throw things into the fire one by one, including the handicrafts she and Donald had made together and the paintings Maggie had drawn of him. Donald watched like this. At first, he was smiling, but then he started crying while smiling. Maggie was so heartless that she actually burned all their memories in one fire. He also saw the way Maggie put on makeup and wore the wedding dress for him at the end. He kept watching the surveillance of Maggie's last moments in this house until the nanny called him to eat the fish. He went downstairs and at the same time found the surveillance of Maggie eating fish and ate the fish with it. He took the first bite, then looked at the fish in the bowl and didn't take a second bite. Maggie didn't like fish 3 years ago. She always thought fish had a fishy smell and couldn't stand it. Why did she suddenly like fish? Remembering what Joseph said today about the problems in the mental hospital, he couldn't help but clench his fists. After a while, Donald turned around and made a phone call. "I asked you to investigate Maggie's records in the mental hospital for the past 3 years. Have you found anything?" Donald was shocked by the negative answer from the other side. A month had passed, and his people hadn't found anything. The person on the phone continued. "This mental hospital isn't an ordinary one. It doesn't belong to the normal mental hospital system. It belongs to a private enterprise. Our people can't get in and can't find any information either." After hearing this, Donald was even more puzzled. It would still take time to investigate, but he thought of the person who had suggested sending Maggie to the mental hospital in the first place. Catherine hadn't been seen for a long time. Thinking carefully, during the 3 years, every time Donald had the slightest thought of going to pick up or visit Maggie, Catherine would always have an accident at the first moment. Either her heart hurt or her stomach hurt. The excuses were so clumsy, and Donald had only just realized it now. Holding back his anger, he made the first phone call to Catherine. After the busy tone, he made the second, third, and fourth calls. No one answered. Just as he was about to give up, he suddenly clicked on Maggie's phone number. He dialed, but soon, the other side hung up. Donald stood up abruptly and dialed again. After repeating this several times, he found that he hadn't been blocked by Maggie, so he sent a text message instead. Maggie, I was wrong. You can punish me however you want when you come back. Please come back. Okay. We don't have to get married either. Please answer my call. When he edited and sent another message, Maggie had actually blocked Donald. Maggie looked at the countless messages from Donald and didn't speak for a while. Then a voice came from the person on the phone. What's wrong? Joseph smiled. Are you used to it over there? Maggie gave a faint, and didn't say anything more. When Joseph agreed to help her run away from the wedding, the only condition was that she had to keep in touch with him at all times. And now Joseph called her 10 times a day, always asking her if she was used to it and what she had eaten. Seeing her perfunctory attitude, Joseph suddenly dropped a bombshell. Donald is investigating your 3 years in the mental hospital. What do you think? Maggie was taken aback for a moment, and then said expressionlessly, Aren't you also investigating? Joseph was still trying to explain. This is different. There's no difference. Maggie interrupted him mercilessly. Let him investigate if he wants to. Anyway, we don't have to see each other anymore. At this point, before Joseph could say anything, he was hung up on. He looked at the phone and sighed helplessly. Then he picked up a file about Catherine and Maggie. It all started with Catherine's accusation 3 years ago. Joseph had thought about getting the surveillance footage from that year. But when he sent someone to check, the team of the engagement hotel from that year had already disbanded, and he couldn't find the surveillance at all. According to the rumors, Catherine accused Maggie of stealing the safety amulet, which was a keepsake left by her mother, and breaking it. And Maggie also hit someone. Although it sounded ridiculous, there was a key point. That was the broken keepsake, which was a safety amulet. He clearly remembered that when he picked Maggie up and brought her to the Hamilton family, Maggie had such a safety amulet on her. It was because of Catherine's frame-up that Maggie had become what she was today. He had originally planned to teach Catherine a lesson, but now he was faced with a more troublesome matter. Catherine actually had a twin sister who was abandoned that year. It took a lot of connections to find this out, which showed that the Catherine family attached great importance to this and had covered it up layer by layer. And this twin sister was abandoned at a time very close to when Maggie was abandoned. With all these clues, it was hard not to think that Maggie might be the eldest daughter of the Catherine family who was abandoned. When Catherine woke up again, she was in a suburban villa under her father's name. She went downstairs and saw her father, who had been chanting sutras and eating a vegetarian diet for almost a month in a row. She had been sleeping in a daze in this villa for almost a month, and she still couldn't come to terms with the fact that after that day at the cemetery, her father had pulled her home and slapped her twice. Dad, I told you not to meddle. Why did you interfere? Slap. Catherine's father's slap landed on Catherine's face, who was shouting. A flush quickly spread across Catherine's fair face. She covered her face in disbelief, only to receive a stern look from her father. I've really done so many evil deeds. I actually raised you like this. Catherine didn't admit her mistake and had a paranoid look in her eyes. I just wanted to marry into the Hamilton family. What's wrong with that? That wild girl Maggie doesn't deserve Donald at all. Only I, Catherine, am a suitable match. Slap. Another fierce slap landed. Catherine's father almost fainted and threw out a stack of papers, roaring, Take a good look. Catherine, she's your sister. Your real sister. On each of those paternity test reports, there was evidence. At first, Catherine's father simply didn't want to believe it and sent others to look for other traces of Maggie's life. But every time the result brought back was the same. She, Maggie, was the eldest daughter he had abandoned back then. Not only that, but more than 20 years later, Maggie was actually framed by her own younger sister and spent 3 years in a mental hospital. The sisters harming each other was already his greatest punishment. Catherine's father didn't want to let Catherine go any further. He found a good family for Catherine to get engaged to and locked Catherine in the suburban villa before the wedding, fearing that something would go wrong. He also chanted sutras and ate a vegetarian diet every day and took Catherine to the cemetery to visit her deceased mother. Catherine's father held Catherine down and made her kowtow several times, explaining to Catherine's mother and begging for forgiveness from heaven for the sins he had committed. He said, "None of us in the Catherine family are worthy of Maggie. You must be very anxious watching from heaven. Please bless us." The last sentence, Catherine's father said to Catherine's mother. He only hoped that after Catherine successfully got married, he could apologize to Maggie in person. But Catherine didn't want to understand her father's actions. She only wanted to marry Donald, even if Maggie was her sister. It was false to say that she didn't regret what she had done, but it had already happened. At worst, she could apologize and make amends later. It was definitely not right to lock herself up in this desolate place and wait for a man she had never met to marry her. That night, as expected, Catherine's father sent a group of people to guard the door, the walls, and every corner, and he went to the company. Catherine first sneaked into the study and found her phone. As soon as she turned it on, countless call records from Donald popped up on the screen. Catherine was overjoyed. Donald still cared about her. She also saw the news that Maggie had run away from the wedding and sincerely thanked her sister Maggie in her heart. As soon as she made the call, Donald answered it after a while. "Hello." Donald had been drunk all night since he was blocked by Maggie, and he was still drunk at this moment. But Catherine thought that Donald was too heartbroken for her. She immediately explained, "Donald, my dad locked me at home. I didn't mean to not answer your phone." After saying this, it seemed that the person on the other end of the phone was stunned for a moment. Finally, he said word by word, his voice also filled with disbelief. "Catherine." Catherine instinctively, Ed. But she felt that Donald's tone when he called her name was extremely cold. "You really made me look for you so hard." Donald sent someone to pick up Catherine. When the news came back, Catherine had already run away. Donald smashed the wine bottle in his hand. Just last night, he received the activity records of Maggie's 3 years in the mental hospital. Among them, Maggie tried to escape twice and was caught both times. The first time, Maggie couldn't stand the fact that the people there didn't give her food or drink. So she took a chance and tried to escape. But she didn't even manage to climb over the wall before she was caught and starved for 2 days. Seeing that she couldn't escape, Maggie thought it was an ordinary mental hospital and just followed the activity schedule every day. But after a while, it was obviously not right. Occasionally, a group of people would come to the mental hospital and select people from among them. Maggie was selected and taken to the back mountain of the mental hospital. Each person was given a hoe. She thought it was ordinary farming work, but the next second, someone started screaming. Maggie realized that most of the people selected were girls. Several men were attracted by Maggie, who was the cleanest among them, and pounced on her. "You women are quite feisty. Let me teach you a lesson." Maggie refused to give in and used the hoe to fight against the people who pounced on her. Her clothes were torn to shreds, and because she fought back, Maggie was slapped several times, and half of her face was swollen high. In the end, Maggie knocked someone out, and the matter almost caused a death. Only then did the people from the hospital come to solve it. When the doctor in the hospital saw it was Maggie, he immediately scolded his subordinates. "Although she's locked up here, she has someone backing her up. Don't go too far." That night, Maggie picked the lock of her room and climbed over the wall. Even though there were glass shards all over her body bleeding and several flashlights were shining behind her, Maggie didn't stop. But she was already covered in injuries from climbing the wall, and she wasn't familiar with the terrain. She simply couldn't run away. After being taken back, no one applied medicine to Maggie. Instead, they dragged her into a dark room. This time, Maggie had alarmed the people above. Before Maggie could recover, they stabbed her with an electric shock baton. It was only after a day and night that Maggie was released from the dark room. After that, Maggie was never selected again. According to the records, Maggie had conflicts with others after that. It was in the middle of the night when she was sound asleep. The uncle who was imprisoned next door picked the lock and came to Maggie. "No one who comes in can get out. Be in a relationship with me, girl." As the uncle spoke, he pressed himself on Maggie. "If you have a child, maybe you can go out and give birth. Then you can also go out and see the outside world. Don't you think so?" Maggie endured it for a while and finally managed to reach the red brick hidden under the bed. She smashed it directly on the man's head, almost killing him. The hospital didn't take much action. They just locked Maggie in the dark room for a few more days and transferred the man to a farther ward. Just thinking of this, Donald felt suffocated. When he picked Maggie up and took her home, Maggie was just a skeleton. How did she manage to avoid those people? And this was just the tip of the iceberg of what he could find out. How did Maggie get through those 3 years? Donald numbly opened a few more bottles of wine. It was all Catherine's fault. Catherine wasn't that stupid either. She noticed that Donald was obviously in a bad state at the moment and quickly hung up the phone. Now that she was Maggie's biological sister, it would be much more useful to go to grandmother than to Donald. Just like that, holding a phone, she ran all the way from the early morning until dawn and finally reached the old residence of the Hamilton family. She was almost hanging on by her last breath. After knocking on the door, she collapsed at the entrance of the old residence of the Hamilton family. Early in the morning, Donald was also called to the old residence of the Hamilton family by a phone call. Since he was blocked by Maggie, he had been drunk all night. When he arrived at the Hamilton family's house, he still smelled of alcohol. In the meeting hall of the Hamilton family, including Joseph, everyone had a gloomy expression. Donald immediately saw Catherine, who was cowering in the corner, and clenched his fists. No one said a word. Grandmother had been so angry that she was hospitalized that day. After hearing what Catherine told her, she had just returned from the hospital. Leaning on the chair, she started the conversation. Everyone is here. Grandmother looked at the trembling Catherine. Repeat exactly what you told me just now. Catherine didn't want to make the matter bigger at all. She just thought that since grandmother had taken in Maggie for so many years, even relying on this, she could stay in the Hamilton family for a few months. But now it was clearly going to put her on the spot. She shrank her neck and decided to go all out. Sister Maggie is my biological sister. Donald, who had been staring at her intently, was stunned by this unexpected sentence. What the hell are you talking about? Joseph had a serious expression and didn't say anything. Catherine continued. My dad told me. We've already done a DNA test, and there's no doubt about it. He arranged a random engagement for me and wants me to get married. I'm now in a desperate situation. Meg, sister is also missing, so I came to you for help. After she finished speaking, the atmosphere was silent for a while. Joseph asked, then regarding the matter of the safety amulet 3 years ago, do you admit that you framed her? This was the best opportunity to see Maggie again. It wasn't too late to settle those grudges later. Even if he could just see her once, he still had a chance. Thinking this way, Donald spoke ahead of Catherine. The most urgent thing now is to bring Maggie back for a family reunion. Joseph, don't think I don't know what you're up to. Joseph finally gave him a disdainful look and didn't say anything more. He had already investigated this matter roughly some time ago. What kind of nonsense family reunion was this? If Maggie knew that it was her own biological sister who sent her to the mental hospital and that the man who wanted to slap her before was her biological father, most likely, Maggie couldn't bear it in her heart. Seeing Joseph's silence, grandmother sighed and said to Joseph, tell Sue. Let Sue make her own decision. This is also a matter within her own family. After saying this, everyone dispersed. Donald sent grandmother back to the hospital, and Catherine successfully stayed in the Hamilton family's house. Joseph took out his phone and dialed the number at the top of the call records. The other side answered quickly. What's wrong? We just called after breakfast in the morning. I'm buying furniture now. If you have something to say it quickly. Maggie was straightforward. Joseph usually called at those specific time points, and today was indeed unusual. Hearing that Maggie was in a good mood, Joseph couldn't bear to tell her the truth. Even though Maggie already had the idea of settling down there, he had no choice. Maggie, if your biological parents and sister are found, would you come back to City S? Grandma is also ill. What's wrong with Grandma? Maggie interrupted. Maggie wasn't as fragile as Joseph thought, but after hearing that Grandma was ill, she quickly bought a plane ticket and flew back. On the plane, Maggie didn't dare to close her eyes. Although she knew that her biological parents had been found, she was first worried about Grandma's illness. But once she had some free time, she couldn't help but fantasize. After all these years, had she actually found the parents who abandoned her when she was born? She couldn't believe that she would have a sister. Maggie had fantasized countless times that she was abandoned by a family that favored sons over daughters. But she actually had a sister. Her sister had everything that she didn't have. Thinking this way, Maggie even had a glimmer of hope in her heart that her sister hadn't been abandoned. After getting off the plane, Joseph picked up Maggie and rushed straight to the hospital. Outside the ward, Maggie took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Grandmother didn't know that they would be so quick. "Come in." Maggie pushed the door open. Grandmother happened to look up. For a moment, it was as if time had stood still. The two of them looked at each other without making a sound. Maggie's eyes became sour, and she called out, "Grandma." First. The next second, Grandmother lifted the quilt, got out of bed, and hugged Maggie. Her voice choked with sobs. "Good child, you're finally back." Seeing the two of them hugging and crying, Joseph closed the door and went out. Grandmother helped Maggie wipe away her tears, and Maggie held Grandmother's arm and sat back on the bed. "About your parents. Did you hear what Joseph told you?" Hearing this, Maggie nodded. Grandmother held her hand tightly. "Then do you know who they are?" Joseph hadn't told her, and Maggie denied this answer. "I don't know." But Grandmother didn't want to beat around the bush. It was the will of fate. But Maggie had done nothing wrong. "It's the Catherine family." "Catherine? She's your biological sister." Maggie's body visibly trembled. She had originally wanted to pretend to smile with relief after hearing the answer. But at this moment, her mouth simply wouldn't obey her. She was afraid that a smile would look uglier than a cry. Was it really her own biological sister who sent her to the mental hospital 3 years ago? Did the man who wanted to slap her some time ago suddenly become her biological father? God always loved to play tricks on people. So before, she had kowtowed to a mother she had never met. Maggie grabbed the bed railing to prevent herself from sliding to the ground. Her whole body was going weak and shaking. It was as if she could suffocate on the spot the next second. Grandmother hugged Maggie into her arms and gently stroked her back. "It's okay. If you don't want to see them or recognize them, Grandma will stand up for you. You've already been a member of our Hamilton family for a long time." Maggie couldn't resist the hug now and could only cry her heart out in Grandmother's arms. She had been abandoned by her biological parents and then by her adoptive parents. Then there was Joseph's departure, and Donald and her own biological sister sending her to the mental hospital for 3 years. Maggie had long since lost the meaning of her life. But at this moment, just as she was finally ready to pull away, someone told her that she had a home and that they would protect her if anything happened. She had packed her luggage yesterday, taken the plane in the early morning, and rushed to the hospital as soon as she landed. She hadn't closed her eyes for dozens of hours. Maggie cried until she fainted. It wasn't until the afternoon that she woke up naturally. She talked a lot with Grandmother, and Joseph brought her food in the afternoon. But the happiness didn't last long. Joseph came in and looked at Maggie, saying, "Donald knows you're back. He's coming to the hospital soon. Do you want to see him?" Maggie put down the soup spoon that was in midair, and her expression changed slightly. No, she simply didn't have the energy to deal with Donald now. Joseph didn't say much either. He took Maggie to the garage. "Aren't you getting in the car?" Maggie asked Joseph, who had closed the car door for her. Joseph stared at Maggie for a while. His elbow passed through the car window, and he naturally stroked Maggie's head a couple of times. "As long as you don't want to see him, I won't let him find you." Maggie didn't actually resist that much. But before she could say anything more, the driver had driven out of the garage, and it was too late. The light on the earphone the driver was wearing was flashing. She didn't know what he had heard, but the driver drove at a speed of 100 on a road with a speed limit of 80. Maggie felt uneasy inside. She always felt that something big was going to happen. When Donald arrived at the hospital, Joseph was already waiting for him at the entrance. There were beads of sweat on Donald's forehead. He didn't look like he was coming to cause trouble. "Where's Maggie?" Joseph's eyebrows twitched. "She's gone." Before Joseph could say anything more, Donald's fist had landed on Joseph's face. "You fool." He didn't say much. After punching, he turned around and got into the car quickly, driving at full speed. Joseph also sensed that something was wrong and immediately dialed the phone of the driver in Maggie's car. "Slow down. I'm coming over now." After saying this, Joseph had already gotten into his own car and drove towards the location of Maggie's car. Joseph didn't get a response. He looked at the phone that wasn't hung up. "Speak. Where is she?" Maggie looked at the abnormal speed and glanced at the scenery outside the window. They were driving towards the mountains, and this road looked very familiar to her. Joseph heard Maggie's tentative question on the other end of the phone. "Sir, aren't we going to the hotel?" Joseph immediately felt a sense of alarm in his heart and checked the location on his phone. They were driving towards the mental hospital where Maggie had stayed for 3 years. Joseph cursed inwardly and hung up the voice call with the driver. He used another phone to call Donald. As soon as Donald answered the phone, he was scolded severely by Joseph. "Are you crazy? What the hell are you doing?" Donald didn't say anything and concentrated on increasing the speed of the car a bit more. As early as half an hour ago, he had received the news. Since he found out that Maggie had suffered in the mental hospital for 3 years, he had started to investigate the forces behind it. But he didn't expect that before he could take any actual action, his subordinates had alerted the enemy first and were instead exposed in the enemy's sight. As soon as the news that Maggie had returned to City S spread, the people over there took action. Even if Donald thought with his kneecaps, he could guess what the other side wanted to do. After thinking for a while, he said to Joseph on the other end of the phone, "It's the people from the mental hospital. I'll be there soon. You go and contact the people behind them and negotiate. We can talk about anything. Just don't touch Maggie." He hung up the phone after saying this in one breath. After hearing this, Joseph's heart was in his throat. He couldn't help but run a red light. His phone still occasionally transmitted Maggie's voice. "Sir, my heart is a bit uncomfortable. Can you stop the car and let me take a break and take some medicine?" Maggie was trying her best to steady her breath, and she really did look like she was about to suffocate. She also guessed something and said bravely, "The people above won't want a dead body either. Do they really want to directly break their relationship with the Hamilton family?" The driver, who hadn't moved for a long time, finally took action. He looked at Maggie through the rearview mirror. "You're very smart, but also very stupid." As he spoke, he made a sudden break, casually hung up the phone with Joseph, opened the car door, got out, dragged Maggie out of the back seat, and slammed her into a big tree. He used a lot of force, and Maggie immediately felt excruciating pain and spat out a mouthful of blood foam. "Because of you, not only the Hamilton family, but also the Catherine family, which has been cooperating with us for many years, is going to turn against us. The ones who really want to break their relationship with the higher-ups are the Catherine family." Maggie could hardly think. The driver had already approached her, tied her to the tree, and waved a bottle of medicine in front of Maggie's nose. Why? What role was the Catherine family playing? Why was she involved? Maggie's internal organs were all in pain. The pain was so intense that she couldn't think. Her hands and feet were gradually going numb, and she couldn't move. She was only held in place by the rope tied to the tree. The driver stared at Maggie for a while, then answered a phone call standing not far away, got back into the car, and drove away. In the vast forest, after a rain, only Maggie was left alone. Maggie was in a daze and had a dream. She dreamed that she had parents and a sister, and her life was smooth sailing. In the dream, she also felt that it wasn't real, until she reached the climax of the dream. At the wedding, her fiancé slowly turned around. It was a faceless man whose facial features were too blurred to be seen clearly. She woke up with a start and found herself being carried into the trunk of a car by a man she didn't know. It was dark in front of her eyes. Just as she was about to fall asleep again, the car suddenly made a huge drift and stopped moving. Maggie's head hit something in the trunk. When she opened her eyes again, the trunk had been opened. The car started quickly, and Maggie was thrown out of the trunk. She fell to the ground and opened her eyes blurrily. Now she was by the side of a three-way intersection. The front of a white car was completely caved in, and it was still desperately crashing into the black car from which she had just been thrown out. With great effort, she sat up and realized that the rope on her body had also been cut with a knife. It took her a while to recognize that the white car belonged to Donald. The white car crashed into the black car again with great force, and the loud explosion made Maggie's whole body tremble. The person in the black car cursed and stuck half of his head out. "Are you crazy? I've already returned the person to you. If you keep crashing, do you want to die together with me?" Maggie's eyes became sour, and with great effort, she shouted, "Donald." Donald turned his head and looked at her. Only after a closer look did he find that there was blood on Maggie. He tried to open the car door, but the door was so severely deformed that it was almost impossible to open. Seeing that Donald no longer had the intention of chasing and crashing into him, the black car immediately made a turn and sped away. For a moment, it seemed that everything had quieted down. Maggie sat leaning against a tree and heard Donald's heart-wrenching shouts one after another. Donald was like a desperate and crazy gambler, using his own body to ram the door that couldn't be opened due to excessive deformation again and again. Maggie's heart ached when she heard this. It was probably a few minutes, Or perhaps because of Maggie's concentration. Time seemed to be infinitely stretched. Donald finally managed to break open the car door and fell out of the car to the ground. Maggie saw that Donald's abdomen was bleeding profusely. He had countless wounds all over his body, but he seemed to be oblivious to the pain. After falling, Donald got up once, but only took 2 steps before falling heavily to the ground again. The sound of his body hitting the ground seemed to hit Maggie's heart directly, causing a sharp pain. Maggie finally came to her senses and also tried to crawl towards Donald's position. The two of them finally met. Maggie hugged Donald, whose body temperature was dropping rapidly due to excessive blood loss. Maggie looked at Donald. All the countless words in her heart just now disappeared, and she only uttered 3 words. "You're crazy." Donald forced a smile and raised one hand. He was showing the ring that Maggie had burned with her own hands. "I miss you." After saying this, Donald fainted. Maggie looked at the road that Donald had just crawled along, feeling exhausted. It was all covered in Donald's blood. It was a path of blood. Outside the emergency room, Maggie had just hung up the phone with Joseph. She and Donald had been brought to the hospital, and the first person she called was Joseph. Joseph sounded like he had just been in a fight, panting as he told her that he would arrive soon. After a while, Joseph, with a bruised face, rushed over. Looking at Maggie with empty eyes, he immediately hugged her into his arms. Maggie didn't resist. She instinctively relaxed her shoulders and leaned against Joseph's arms with a sense of security. She closed her eyes, as if she could fall asleep the next second. Unfortunately, this scene was coincidentally seen by Grandmother, who had just arrived. Grandmother deliberately coughed twice, and Maggie immediately woke up. She pushed Joseph away and stood up from her seat. She didn't know what to say. Clearly, the two of them had felt a strong connection in the morning, but half a day later, she had caused one of Grandmother's grandsons to be hospitalized, and she was lying in the arms of Grandmother's other grandson. Maggie stood there, swaying a few times. Joseph noticed something was wrong and was about to speak, but was silenced by a glance from Maggie. Grandmother after all couldn't ignore this and called Maggie. "Come and have a talk with me." Maggie bypassed Joseph and followed Grandmother into the stairwell. In the dim light, Maggie spoke first. "Grandma, I'm sorry." Almost the next second after Maggie finished speaking, Grandmother asked, "What did you do wrong?" Maggie swallowed hard. When she spoke again, her voice was trembling. "I shouldn't have wavered between the two of them. When I left, I should have been determined not to return to City S." The other person quickly asked, "So you mean you don't want to see Grandma in the future?" Maggie immediately denied it. "That's not what I mean." They let the atmosphere be quiet for a while. Grandmother groped in the dark and took Maggie's hand, recalling the past. "This isn't your fault, Maggie. I've always known who you like." In the dark, Maggie's eyes seemed to light up a bit. Grandmother continued, "Remember, it was Joseph who picked you up and brought you home. Later, during our time together, although you seemed to have a better relationship with Donald, it was obvious that you regarded him as a younger brother. But every time you saw Joseph, your eyes would light up as if they were shining." Grandmother really remembered a scene that happened about 10 years ago. Once, Donald was knocked down by other children, and Maggie stood up for him. The other person was a chubby boy. Not only did he not apologize for knocking down Donald, but when he saw Maggie helping Donald up, he started to mock them. "Are you still a man? You fell down with just one bump and need a girl to help you up." Donald was about to cry, but Maggie didn't show any leniency at all. She had received little education since she was a child and didn't know what it meant to make peace and value harmony, or endure for a while and everything will be calm. The kind of upbringing in wealthy families. She had grown up struggling on her own, and her strength was no joke. She pushed the chubby boy down with one hand. "You're as fat as a meat bun, and yet I, a girl, can still push you down." Maggie pulled Donald behind her and said, "He's my younger brother. I'm willing to help him up. You don't have a sister to help you, so you're just jealous." The chubby boy was about to pout and cry, but he quickly noticed something. "Do you really consider yourself his sister? You're just a little thief picked up from the outside." When Donald heard this, he stopped crying and shouted directly, "So what if she's a thief? So what if she was picked up? She's now a member of the Hamilton family. The Hamilton family can take good care of her." Thinking about it this way, Donald's obsession with taking good care of Maggie seemed to have been planted at that time. Joseph didn't like to get involved in the childish grudges of children and was always the one to end the situation. He just stared at the chubby boy for a few seconds, and the boy ran away in fright. But he always liked to give psychological counseling to others. Every time Maggie was criticized, he would always pull her into the room. At that time, it was raining heavily outside, and Maggie was a child drenched in the rain. Don't care about what they say. They're just jealous that you can be in the Hamilton family. You haven't done anything wrong. Just be yourself. These words were always very effective for the young Maggie. After feeling wronged, having someone tell you that you haven't done anything wrong and that the charm of being yourself is always great. Later, they grew up a bit. Two elders of the Hamilton family passed away one after another, and the Hamilton family faced a business crisis. Grandmother wanted to sell the shares and withdraw completely, but Joseph took the initiative to take charge of the overall situation using the will. Just that time, Maggie realized that the relationship between the grandmother and grandson in the Hamilton family had become strained. After that, there was a big fire. That fire completely ignited the fuse of the grudges in the Hamilton family. In the kitchen of the old residence of the Hamilton family, on an ordinary day, Maggie was just looking for something to eat because she was hungry after school. But suddenly a big fire broke out. By the time Maggie realized it, it was already too late. She was choked by a mouthful of thick smoke. The old kitchen was all made of wood. It was said that the fire wouldn't spread so quickly. But somehow, once the wooden house caught fire, it all burned. There was fire on all sides. So Maggie could only find a large water tank in the corner and shout for help. I don't know how long it had passed, but Maggie started to have difficulty breathing. Then, as if by coincidence, Joseph appeared in front of Maggie. He was wearing a wet sheet on his body. He woke up the drowsy Maggie, picked her up, and rushed outside. However, when they passed a threshold, the door frame happened to fall down. It landed precisely on Joseph's back. For a moment, both of them fell heavily to the ground. Joseph came into direct contact with the burned-through wood, and there was no uninjured flesh on his back. He took a sharp breath, endured the pain, and crawled out from under the wood, collapsing weakly in front of Maggie. Maggie couldn't react, still in the situation of trying to escape from the fire. She pulled Joseph several times. Get up quickly, Joseph. But Joseph didn't move. Instead, he took out a ring and called out, Maggie, weakly, take good care of Donald for me. As he spoke, he put the ring on Maggie's ring finger. When Maggie recalled this, it was as if she was immersed in a dream with a pre-written ending. The whole thing was very absurd and ridiculous. Even the reason that spread later. Clearly this fire had no logic at all. Maggie didn't know that the kitchen of the old residence of the Hamilton family was actually the place where grandmother stored her dowry. Just because of the old-fashioned ring that Joseph gave to Maggie, the servants and even the outside world started to spread the rumor that Maggie, because she wanted to steal grandmother's dowry, accidentally caused the kitchen to catch fire. And Joseph was seriously injured while saving her and went abroad for recuperation. The accusations against Maggie kept getting worse. She was called an ungrateful person, a thief, someone who killed for money. The whole Hamilton family was involved in this matter. It so happened that the members of the Hamilton family were all away on the day of the fire. Later, when the rumors spread wildly, no one stood up to explain a single word for Maggie. As the rumors spread, Donald also took them seriously and insisted that Maggie couldn't change her ways. So for many years after that, Maggie was immersed in the shadow of that fire. But she had already thought it through clearly. It was all part of Joseph's plan to get away from the Hamilton family. And it was precisely this kind of scandal that grandmother would never reveal to the outside world. Joseph really had great means. In the stairwell, grandmother sighed. That fire was a self-directed and self-performed act by Joseph. Maggie said without much emotion. I know. Grandmother was completely stunned. Her revealing of the past was actually to persuade Maggie to pull out. But Maggie knew that Joseph had a deep mind and used all kinds of means when doing things. Grandmother smiled as if she had let go of something and let out a sigh of relief. So you've made up your mind. Maggie lowered her head, hiding some emotions, and leaned against the door of the stairwell. She shook her head indifferently. I have no feelings for Joseph. Grandmother didn't say anything more. On the other side of the door she leaned against. Joseph, who was standing there, lowered his head. After the two of them finished talking and came out of the stairwell, Catherine also rushed over at this time. Catherine leaned against the glass door and could only see a group of doctors busily working around Donald. Donald, however, lay pale on the operating table without any movement. Catherine clenched her fists and immediately vented all her anger on Maggie, who had already returned to sit on the bench. Why did you come back after you left? Why on earth did you come back? Maggie looked up at Catherine calmly and couldn't say a word. Joseph stood up and separated Catherine and Maggie, staring at Catherine defensively. Grandmother sat on the side and said silently, "Catherine, go and sit over there." What did I say wrong? Catherine took 2 steps back almost in a state of collapse, her eyes wandering between the grandmother and grandson of the Hamilton family. One of you. The person lying inside is your own grandson. The other. The person lying inside is your own younger brother. But you're all on the side of this Maggie. Maggie, who is nothing. Joseph couldn't help but sneer and looked at Catherine with a hint of evil in his eyes, interrupting her. She's your biological sister. Catherine's whole body shook. She could never understand why her father, who had always loved her the most, suddenly arranged an engagement for her because of this biological sister. The people of the Hamilton family were willing to risk the downfall of their family for this biological sister. It was as if a world that had been originally peaceful and prosperous in Catherine's heart began to fall into chaos and disintegrate. She suddenly grabbed Joseph with one hand and pointed at Maggie with the other. She's not. She was thrown out a long time ago. Do you know? It was predicted that she was born with the fate of bad omen. She will bring bad luck to anyone around her. Everyone around her will come to no good end. The fortune teller was really right. She deserves to. Slap. Maggie's slap landed on Catherine's face. Joseph was suddenly shocked. His hand was still raised in the air and hadn't fallen yet. Following their gazes, Maggie had no expression on her face and looked at Catherine, who was stunned by the slap. Maggie said word by word, "This slap is from your mother. Remember the screenshots on your phone at the cemetery? Those were the pictures that Catherine had photoshopped herself. Every vicious word she typed about her mother was written by her own hands. At that time, I was angry on behalf of your deceased mother. If I had such a daughter, I would climb out of my grave and give her 2 slaps. I didn't have the right before, but now I do. Do you think Donald doesn't know anything?" Maggie felt pain all over her body. She looked at Catherine a few more times and then sat back in her seat and pretended to doze off. The next second, the door of the operating room opened. Donald had already woken up and also saw the scene where Maggie had just struck. He was wheeled out, and his gaze stopped on Maggie. Soon, Donald's gaze was blocked by another figure. Catherine stood between the two of them and reached out to hold Donald's pale and weak hand. "Donald, you've finally woken up." Before she could finish speaking, Donald mercilessly pulled his hand out of Catherine's. He called out in a weak voice, "Maggie, Maggie." The smile on Catherine's face froze immediately. Maggie took a few steps forward and followed the team into the ward. In the ward, Catherine rushed to Donald with red eyes. "Donald, I didn't know anything before. I'm not like that. You were fine before. When you get better, we'll be like before, traveling everywhere and going to all the places we haven't been." Catherine didn't say anything more. She saw Donald raise his eyes and look at her, expressionless, like a cold machine. Donald had never looked at her with such eyes before. Catherine was completely panicked. Donald, I was wrong." Before she could finish, she saw Donald's lips move. "Get her out of here. I don't want to see anyone from the Catherine family." Catherine didn't want to leave, and it ended up being an unpleasant scene. She was carried out of the ward by 2 security guards and thrown out. Catherine was thrown to the entrance of the hospital. Her hair was in a mess, and she no longer had the bright and beautiful appearance of the daughter of the Catherine family. Even passers-by who saw her could say a few words like, "Crazy person." Maggie stood by the window of the ward, looking at all this with no expression on her face. She just felt that it was a bit like herself in the past. Maggie stopped looking and turned to walk towards the door. "Maggie," Donald called out weakly again. Grandmother and Joseph were also in the room. Maggie originally wanted to avoid them. Grandmother was frustrated and disappointed and said, "All you can do is call Maggie. Your grandmother is still here." After saying this, she signaled Maggie with her eyes. Maggie understood grandmother's meaning. If she didn't want to see Donald and wanted to leave, grandmother would stop Donald for her. But Maggie stood still. A few seconds later, she turned around and went back to Donald's bedside. Joseph raised his eyes and took a look. Maggie looked at Donald. "If you have anything else to say it all at once." Donald didn't explain anything. He just asked, "Do you still hate me?" "No." Maggie's words were concise. Seeing Donald nod, Maggie immediately left the ward. It was as if she had finally regained oxygen and was gasping for breath. She had dreamed of Donald's face countless times during the 3 years. Whenever she had such a dream, the next second she would feel as if she was being pressed down by a cage. Even after so long, she would subconsciously resist. But they had so many beautiful memories in the past. And this time Donald had risked his life to save her. Their relationship was too complicated. So complicated that Maggie felt oppressed. She didn't know how to face it. But did Maggie hate Donald? She had also thought about it again and again, but never got an answer. However, at the moment when Donald asked her just now, she blurted out the answer. She didn't hate him, but she would never forgive him. Joseph followed closely behind, took off his suit and draped it over Maggie. Do you want me to book you a plane ticket to leave? Or would you like to stay here temporarily? As soon as Joseph finished speaking, Maggie in front of him bent down halfway. Looking forward, Maggie spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. The next second, Maggie, pale-faced and unable to control herself, closed her eyes and fell straight into Joseph's arms. Joseph's breath caught in his throat. He quickly picked her up and contacted the doctor. When Maggie woke up, it was already the next day. Looking at the familiar ceiling, she knew she was in Joseph's room, lying on Joseph's bed. She recalled that when they were young, Joseph was actually a person with severe mysophobia, which was one of the reasons why he didn't like to play with those children. Donald once played house with Maggie and accidentally entered Joseph's room. Donald just sat on his bed, and Joseph packed up the bed sheets and quilt covers and threw them out. At that time, Maggie had just come to the Hamilton family not long ago and thought that Joseph was just a difficult young master to serve. But on a certain rainy day later, Joseph had comforted Maggie, telling her not to listen to others and to be herself. The sound of the rain outside the window fell into Maggie's ears. Lying in the warm room, she heard the conversation between Joseph and others. The young lady must have fallen from a high place or suffered some kind of impact. Her internal organs are all damaged. We also detected the components of hallucinogenic drugs in the test results, which is also part of the reason why the young lady fainted and didn't wake up. Joseph's voice was cold, but there was a hint of panic. How to treat it? Will there be any sequelae? Actually, the injury is not serious. She just needs to rest quietly. The reason for spitting blood is that the young lady had strenuous activities after being injured yesterday and endured the discomfort all the time. As for the sequelae, it still depends on the degree of recovery later. After hearing this, Joseph waved his hand and brought a bowl of freshly cooked porridge into the room. Maggie looked towards the door and met Joseph's gaze. Maggie forced a smile and said, "Joseph, it turns out you're so worried about me." Joseph fed Maggie the whole bowl of porridge. When he put the bowl down and came back, Maggie had already unlocked his phone. Maggie was so focused that she didn't notice that Joseph had already sat down beside her. Joseph also sensed that something was wrong with Maggie and looked at the screen. It was the trending search page, and the most eye-catching was the title at the top. The whole process of a certain Miss K's self-directed and self-performed act. Such an inexplicable title had actually made it to the trending search, and the comments were all in unison against it. Now anything can be on the trending search. Who is this person? I don't know. It's obvious that someone paid for it. Clicking into the blog video, Maggie was stunned, and Joseph also furrowed his brows. It was a surveillance video. Everyone except Catherine had their faces blurred. Memories flooded into Maggie's mind in an instant. She recognized it at a glance and would never forget that this was the day of her engagement with Donald 3 years ago. Maggie leaned on the railing on the second floor. Catherine looked at Maggie with ill intentions twice. When she came forward to strike up a conversation, she changed her expression. "Sister Maggie, you're so happy." Maggie turned around and saw it was Catherine. She originally wanted to smile and thank her, but Catherine fixed her eyes on the safety amulet in Maggie's hand. Maggie didn't have time to be polite. Catherine grabbed the safety amulet from Maggie's hand. Catherine said in an unfriendly tone, "Where did you get this thing?" But it seemed that she didn't need Maggie's answer. She lowered her head again and took out an identical safety amulet from nowhere. Maggie was so shocked that she couldn't speak. "Why do you also have?" Crack. Before Maggie could finish speaking, her safety amulet was shattered by Catherine. Catherine quickly put away her safety amulet and gave Maggie a fierce glare. "It's impossible. This can't be true. You're just pretending." Maggie was stunned by this series of actions and squatted down to pick up the fragments of the safety amulet. Slap, slap, slap. There were several slapping sounds. Maggie looked up and saw Catherine slapping her own face until it turned red. Everything was so inexplicable. Maggie didn't have time to be sad about the broken safety amulet. Then Donald and the others rushed over. Seeing Donald, Catherine burst into tears in an instant and started snatching the fragments from Maggie's hand. During the scuffle, she cut her hand. Donald quickly separated Maggie and Catherine. Catherine took the initiative and cried pitifully. "Donald, this is the only keepsake my mother left me. I don't know why Sister Maggie would do this. Just because I liked you before. Is Sister targeting me like this? Mother will definitely blame me. I'll go see her." As she spoke, Catherine was crying so much that she was on the verge of a breakdown and was about to climb over the railing on the second floor. Everyone exclaimed. But before the next second, Donald hugged her back. Catherine nestled in Donald's arms and cried. Donald's expression changed. Without saying a word, he rushed forward and slapped Maggie. The air instantly froze. Donald didn't have any doubts about Catherine and firmly believed that Maggie had done these things. "Maggie, can't you be more magnanimous? Since when did I not know that you've learned to hit people? Why can't you learn no matter how I teach you? Why on earth did you steal things?" No one in the hall dared to speak. The two main characters of the engagement banquet had a fight. They didn't dare to offend Donald, and they didn't dare to offend the Hamilton family behind Maggie either. They originally thought the video would end there, but at the end of the video, the stupid things Catherine had done were also posted. The mental hospital, the self-directed and self-performed depression, the photoshopped pictures at the cemetery. The phone page returned to the comments. It was unclear whether it was a large number of hired internet trolls arranged by someone behind the scenes or passers-by. But the public opinion had already exposed the Pei family thoroughly. Almost everyone was condemning Catherine. Joseph helped Maggie close the phone and stroked her head. "Don't think about it. It wasn't me." Maggie's body trembled, and she forced a sad smile. So Donald had this surveillance video. For 3 years. If Donald had had the slightest bit of trust in Maggie and had checked the surveillance video even once, Maggie wouldn't have become what she was now. As Maggie was thinking like this, there was a sudden knock on the door. "The people from the Catherine family have been waiting downstairs for a long time. Sir, do you want to see them? Do you want to see them?" Joseph looked at Maggie, who was in a daze and didn't speak. Maggie also looked at Joseph, and Joseph understood what she meant. He opened the door and went downstairs, but didn't close the door. After a while, Maggie got out of bed and walked to the corner of the stairs. From this angle, she could clearly see Joseph in the hall downstairs and the father and daughter of the Catherine family. Joseph played with the cuffs of his shirt expressionlessly. "She doesn't want to see you. You can tell me if you have anything to say." Catherine's expression moved slightly, but her father stopped her movement first. "This time, we're here to apologize to Maggie." After saying this, Joseph still had no expression on his face as he looked at them. But Catherine's father started looking in all directions. "I know you're listening. I'm sorry, Maggie." Catherine's father's voice started to choke up. "You can choose not to forgive us, and we can even never meet again in the future. We're sorry for you, and we must apologize for this." With a thud, Catherine's father knelt on the ground. "I was young and impulsive and believed the slander of villains. They said that the bond between you and me as father and daughter was shallow, and it was my decision alone to send you away. One should take responsibility for one's own actions. Your sister didn't know anything at that time. I just beg you to forgive her and remove the video online. We will never appear in front of you again." Maggie's mouth twitched, and she squatted down halfway and leaned against the wall. But Joseph wasn't convinced. "Forgive her. Didn't she frame Maggie and send her to the mental hospital for 3 years? And all the subsequent things, weren't they all done by her?" Catherine's father was speechless. Finally, Catherine said, "I was bewitched. I resorted to any means to be with Donald. It's all my fault. No matter how sister wants to punish me, it's okay. But please, sister, for the sake of our sisterhood, spare my life." Catherine also understood that now she was not only being publicly shamed online, but even her former friends in the circle were making fun of her and distancing themselves from her. If this continued, she would really be doomed. They spoke one after another, and Catherine's father soon helped Catherine explain. "I had already arranged an engagement for her. Now it has been directly cancelled. It will probably be difficult for Catherine to get married in the future." "So," Maggie listened with empty eyes. Joseph interrupted impatiently. "So, is this act of yours today trying to force Maggie to forgive you? Even if you want to apologize, You should have some sincerity. Right. Enough. Maggie suddenly spoke up and showed half of her face from the stairs. You've got the wrong person. I didn't do it. The father and daughter of the Catherine family were both stunned. What do you mean? Maggie had no expression on her face. She raised the corners of her mouth, and her smile was ugly. Catherine, don't you know? That hotel was owned by Donald, but the hotel disbanded after that day 3 years ago. Do you really not know who has the surveillance video? After saying this, the footsteps on the stairs gradually faded away. Catherine's body trembled, and she didn't even dare to breathe loudly. It was Donald. It was the Donald she had never expected. Catherine didn't know how she was dragged out of Joseph's house by Father Pay. When she regained consciousness, she was already in the car on the way home. It was really Donald. Catherine mumbled to herself and suddenly laughed. All these years, it was as if she had been in an unreal dream. She first met Donald at the entrance of a bar. A very cliched plot. Catherine was there to pick up a friend, but was harassed by a drunkard on the roadside. It was Donald who passed by and helped her. To express her gratitude, Catherine invited Donald to have a drink. Donald didn't seem to be in a good mood at first. After a few drinks, Donald stared straight at Catherine. You're really nice. Catherine's face felt a little hot. What? Donald took another sip of wine and told Catherine the story of him and a woman. In Catherine's view at that time, that woman was his not-so-nice fiancée, Maggie. Donald said that he really liked his fiancée, and he hoped that his fiancée could be as gentle and obedient as Catherine. He also said that Catherine was actually more likable than that woman. Catherine smiled as she recalled. She wondered why she had been so drunk that day, even though she hadn't actually drunk alcohol. Every word Donald said seemed to imply that he liked Catherine more, but not a single word was without mentioning Maggie. Maggie had always been the one in Donald's heart. After walking back to the bed and lying down, Maggie fell into a deep sleep and had a high fever that night. Joseph changed the towel on her forehead again and again, even when he called the doctor to give Maggie an antipyretic injection. It didn't work. Maggie was immersed in a dream. She dreamed of the scene of being abandoned when she was a child. She saw herself standing aside as the fortune teller calculated that she was a jinx. She watched helplessly as her parents sent her away. In the blink of an eye, her adoptive parents also thought of her as a burden and threw her on the street. When she ran back to their residence, it was already empty. Donald's face suddenly appeared. You should be grateful for Catherine's magnanimity. With a bang, the gate of the mental hospital closed, and Maggie was locked in the dark room again. Just as Maggie was plunged into darkness, someone suddenly called her name. Maggie. Maggie. Wake up. Maggie opened her eyes and vaguely saw Joseph shaking her with a worried expression. The curtain was blown open, and a ray of light shone through, dazzling Maggie's eyes. It was already the next day. Joseph sighed. The doctor beside him held a thermometer and said, "She had a fever all night, but it has finally subsided." Joseph saw the tears on Maggie's side face and sent the doctor out of the room. Maggie suddenly looked at Joseph and asked, "Why are you still here?" Joseph was slightly taken aback and looked into Maggie's eyes without speaking. Maggie was like a child who wouldn't stop until she got an answer. She repeated the question, "Why are you still here?" In the dream, Maggie had lost everything. She even thought that in the mental hospital where she was all alone, she might as well just die. In that mental hospital, any way of dying would do. But someone called her name and woke her up. Maggie looked straight at Joseph and stubbornly repeated the question. "Joseph, why?" But this time, Joseph didn't let her finish. His kiss landed accurately on Maggie's lips. For a moment, time seemed to be stretched infinitely long. Joseph didn't wait for Maggie's resistance. Instead, Maggie reached out and hugged him. The two deepened the kiss until they were out of breath. Then Maggie pushed Joseph away and gasped while half grabbing his collar. Neither of them said anything. After a while, they both calmed down. Joseph smiled softly. "You're lying. You obviously like me." Maggie knew that Joseph was referring to the conversation between her and grandmother in the hospital stairwell that day. Thinking of this, Maggie suddenly calmed down. She pushed Joseph's shoulders away a little. "About this matter, I think I still need to consider it." Joseph's expression changed instantly, and he asked in confusion, "Why? You want to renege on it after we've kissed?" Maggie gave an awkward smile. "I just think it's really sorry for grandmother." The originally harmonious Hamilton family had the two brothers alienated because of her, breaking off the engagement with Donald and then being with Joseph. This was not easy for grandmother. who cared so much about the reputation of the Hamilton family, to accept. During that conversation in the stairwell, grandmother was also alluding to this matter. After all, Maggie grew up under grandmother's care, and she also couldn't get over this hurdle. Joseph was about to say something more, but he held back in time. Maggie originally thought that everything would end there. But just as she was about to say goodbye to grandmother and leave City S, Donald was discharged from the hospital. He appeared in front of Maggie in the most unacceptable way for her. Donald knelt down on one knee and held out a ring in front of Maggie. Maggie, give me another chance. Marry me. The atmosphere in the entire Hamilton family instantly froze. Grandmother knew she couldn't stop it and just let it be. She turned around and went back to her room. Joseph glared at Donald, who didn't understand the situation, feeling frustrated and disappointed. Maggie closed her eyes and took a long time to calm down before slowly opening her eyes and pulling Donald away alone. Finally, they reached a place where it seemed less likely to be eavesdropped on. Maggie let go of the hand that they were holding. Looking at the ring, Maggie told the truth. I already made it very clear in the hospital last time. Donald still maintained a decent smile. Maggie, give me another chance. This time there's no Catherine. I will trust you without reservation. If you want any compensation, I will give it to you. It's too late. Maggie mercilessly exposed all the truths. The problem between us is not just Catherine. What else don't you understand? Maggie seemed to be resigned to the situation. For 3 years. How many times could you have come to see me? Even just once. Could anyone really stop you? Young Master Hamilton, why did it take you 3 years to find the surveillance video? Why? Donald. Donald didn't repent and still just begged for a chance. It's all in the past. Maggie, isn't it good for us to start over? Once we get over this hurdle, we can go back to the way we were before. Donald. Maggie almost roared. You only care about yourself. You can get over it. But I can't. It was me who was locked up for 3 years. Me who was almost molested. And me who was forced to live in a dirty and messy environment for 3 years. With just a light word of starting over. Who do you think you are? Donald. It's impossible for us. Maggie thus gave a definite end to their relationship. Donald had never seen Maggie treat him like this before. He suddenly realized that it seemed that there was really no possibility for him and Maggie. Donald lowered his head and took a long time to calm down before retracting the hand holding the ring. I can give you shares of the company. And I can give you money. I'm not a good person. And I'll compensate you. Can you please not hate me? Looking at the extremely humble Donald, Maggie suddenly felt ridiculous about herself. She had once thought that if Donald had just shown a little softness to her, she would have been willing to have a future with him. She had really thought about marrying Donald and living a good life with him for the rest of her life. Maggie was tired. She told the truth. I said in the hospital that I don't hate you. And that's true. I won't forgive you for what you've done to me. And that's also true. After saying this, Maggie passed by him, leaving only one sentence at last. We've known each other for a while. Donald, I wish you all the best in the future. Maggie left, and Donald stayed where he was. He hung his head and looked at the ring on his ring finger, which had an indistinct style and even felt a bit rough. He clearly understood that this was the last time he would see Maggie. Maggie went to see grandmother and said goodbye to her. When she was about to leave, grandmother looked at Joseph and then at Maggie. Maggie, you don't have to worry about anything else in the future. Just do what you want to do. It wasn't until they were out of the Hamilton family's house that Joseph dared to talk to Maggie. After you leave, will you still contact me? Maggie didn't look at him and didn't say anything, but Joseph became the stubborn one first. Maggie, I haven't officially said it yet. Now it seemed that she was no different from the female homeless people in those urban villages. Maggie couldn't help but laugh out loud. I know, but I don't accept it. The world is so big. Why should I revolve around you two brothers of the Hamilton family? After leaving City S, Maggie really didn't contact Joseph anymore. Occasionally, she would get some news by browsing the news. Donald decided to study abroad after that day and never showed up again. Catherine also disappeared without a trace after that incident. Joseph cooperated with the police to investigate the foundation behind the mental hospital. It took a full 2 years to uproot this black industrial chain. For a while, Joseph's popularity soared, and there were countless praise articles about him on the internet. Catherine's father was a key figure in providing evidence. He was also involved in this industry and would inevitably be sentenced. But what shocked Maggie the most was that Catherine's father surrendered himself and pleaded guilty to the crime of abandonment. One afternoon a few months later, Maggie was making a cake at home and scrolled across the hottest news at the moment. Joseph retired and handed over the company to other relatives of the Hamilton family for management. While scrolling through her phone, the doorbell suddenly rang. Maggie ran a few steps to open the door and saw a familiar face. Joseph, who had just been on the phone screen, had taken off his suit and changed into casual clothes. He held up a large bag of vegetables in his hand. "I'm back." The end.